I've been just gradually reading through these delightful parables and looking right now at the table of contents. We did cover, slowly, leisurely, hopefully clearly, the first chapter on Mahayana refuge and bodhicitta. I encourage you to read the second two chapters on karma, and then introduction to parables and meanings, going through those slowly in the mornings. We have the prose identification of Rigpa, the identification of Mahamudra. These two are on Mahamudra, of course, on texture, corresponding to texture. I think everything that's there should be quite clear, actually, from all of the citations, the references, the quotes, and the explanations from Panchen Lozang. I think quite clear. And then how to follow the path of the leap over, or the direct crossing over. I don't teach that to people who are not prepared. I figure, let's just get prepared. Other lamas can teach it. I'm sure they'll do a splendid job. But I don't see any reason to teach that to people who are not yet resting in Rigpa. And then the guide on the path of transference, Poa, very, very useful. We don't have time for that. And then we have these 3 chapters, an introduction to the ground, path, and fruition, the 4 stages of yoga, how to progress along the grounds and path. That is, that's 180 pages or so. No, not quite that many. About 80. 201 to 260. 60. 60 pages. So all the detail you could hope for about the 4 yogas, how they map onto the 5 paths and the 10 bhumis. But I think we've taken the essence of it. And then at your leisure you can read this and fill in a lot of detail. My own predilection is I want to know all the detail necessary about the beginning. And then further along the path, the vaguer my understanding is. That's my sense, because life is short. But I'd like to know, if you're on a journey, it'd be really good to know if you're on like an expedition, like one of those wagon trains heading to the west 200 years ago. The most important thing is, do you know the next leg of your journey? And not what's it like 500 miles over yonder. It'd be good to have some idea. But what you really want to know is, how do you get through the next day? Right? Next 10 miles or so. So I'm leaping here's a direct leap over, from chapter 4 to chapter 12, the conclusion, which is quite marvelous. And that's where we go now. I think very appropriate. And so, conclusion, homage to Avalokiteshvara. These are the profound practical instructions of Avalokiteshvara. At the end of these 30 chapters of instructions on the union of Mahamudra and Dzogchen, I should synthesize the meaning of these teachings. So you'll see there are 12 chapters here, and that means there had to have been 18 chapters in A Spacious Path of Freedom, including all the chapters on the preliminary practices that Gyatso Rinpoche said that's covered elsewhere. We don't need to do that. So Gyatso Rinpoche took me kind of like midway through the text, and we just picked up right there. So you can read exactly what he taught in Spacious Path of Freedom. But what this means is that at the end of these 30 chapters, 30 chapters, he covered all of this in 30 chapters. And now he's finished with that. So up to chapter 11. And now he's going to synthesize everything he taught in Spacious Path of Freedom and everything he taught in this volume as well. So we return to Orgyen Rinpoche, Padmasambhava. Orgyen Rinpoche says the synthesis of the meaning is for the sake of bringing delight in the teachings. And that is, once you've taught the teachings, then synthesize them. Reminds me of that old cliche we've heard so many times about public speaking. Say what you're going to say it, and then say what you said. Tell everybody what you just said. Very straightforward. That's what he's doing here. I'm now going to tell you what I've said, but I'm going to summarize it so you really remember it. Right? And it's to make you happy, to inspire you, to encourage you. The way to synthesize the meaning is suggested by Orgyen Rinpoche's prophecy. My speech emanation. Orgyen Rinpoche is Padmasambhava. My speech emanation. Oh, Lakeborn Vajra. Right? Lakeborn Vajra. Ring a bell? Lakeborn Vajra? Saroruha Vajra in Sanskrit. My speech emanation by the name of Dipamkara. That's Atisha. My speech emanation by the name of Dipamkara will be a bodhisattva who will purify the land of Tibet. In accordance with that prophecy, the Venerable Lord, the glorious Atisha, who was like the crown jewel among 500 Pandits in India, came to Tibet. So that's very interesting from Padmasambhava himself. It's not just lore, some people say, but actually prophecy from Padmasambhava, that Atisha would be a speech emanation of him, the lake-born Vajra. It's widely, universally regarded that the Panchen Rinpoche was a reincarnation of Atisha. So is Khedrubje, who sits on Tsongkhapa's left. And on Tsongkhapa's right is Gyawa Gendron Dupa. So there's Tsongkhapa right in the middle, right? And to his right is Gyawa Gendron Dupa. That was a previous incarnation of the Dalai Lama, his senior disciple. And his junior disciple, the junior of his two spiritual sons, is on Tsongkhapa's left. You see a little bit frown? Can you see a little bit frown? Khedrubje is a bit tough. Get out of the way, I want to see Khedrubje. You want to see Khedrubje? A little bit frown. Because he was not very tough. He was a tough debater. Don't mess with Khedrubje. If you debate with him, you'll really regret it. Right? So is the lake-born Vajra. A little bit, remember? A little bit. Not too happy with your mental afflictions. So that's Panchen Rinpoche. Khedrubje was an earlier incarnation of Panchen Rinpoche. So Atisha was incarnation of Panchen Rinpoche, and his principal disciple was Domdumba. He was an incarnation of Dalai Lama. And the fifth Dalai Lama, his guru was the Panchen Rinpoche. And so they've gone back and forth over centuries now. Guru-disciple relationship, guru-disciple, disciple-guru, guru-disciple, back and forth, back and forth. He has quite a lineage, Panchen Rinpoche. I checked it out and I found it so interesting. I wrote up a file on it from the most reliable sources. Very, very authentic sources. And so the Panchen Rinpoche himself traces back to Khedrubje, traces back to Atisha, traces back to Padmasambhava, traces back to Subhuti. Subhuti is an arhat in both the Pali Canon, he's there, not highly emphasized, but Subhuti appears very prominently in the Mahayana Canon, in the Diamond Kata Sutra. He's the chief figure, apart from the Buddha. He's the chief one, and that was the earlier incarnation of the Panchen Rinpoche. So he too, like the Dalai Lama, could say, I remember what it was like being with the Buddha. And then where did he fundamentally stem from? Amitabha. So as His Holiness Dalai Lama stems from Avalokiteshvara. So the Panchen Rinpoche stems from Amitabha. And that lineage just keeps on flowing, right into the anomaly of the 20th century, where very interesting dynamic between the 13th Dalai Lama and the Panchen Rinpoche of that time, Panchen Tupten Chökyi Nyima was his name. Very remarkable. Spent a lot of time in Nepal and China. Very, very interesting. Dynamic between the two. Shortly after the 13th Dalai Lama passed away, very abruptly, like in his mid-50s, just kind of like died. Then Panchen Rinpoche was off in Beijing, I think, in China. Then he was called back immediately, come back. And so he's coming back to a Tibet bereft of a Dalai Lama. He passed away, the 13th. He was coming back, hastening back. They're saying, please come back, we need you now. And he's coming back, and he came to Kyekundo in kind of a very remote region of Kham, right on the border of Amdo. He came there, and he passed away. He spent 18 days in the clear light of death. 18 days. The story about the Panchen Rinpoche and all the drama that followed that is quite remarkable. A lot of drama, a lot of strangeness. And of course, the present incarnation, there can always be more than one incarnation. These are great beings. But the one that was identified by the Dalai Lama is an incarnation as this very problematic last Panchen Lama. Of course, he was put under house arrest when he was 3 or 4 years old. So nobody knows what's become of him. But one other little interesting caveat is that widely regarded in Tibet, it is said that Panchen Lozang, in one of his earlier incarnations, quite a few hundreds of years ago, he was one of the kings of Shambhala, one of the kings of Shambhala. And he took the vast Kalachakra Tantra, which is enormous, and for which we don't have it in our world. It's only in Shambhala, but we don't have it here. Right? But he was the king of Shambhala, and he was also a great scholar, a great adept, of course. And he synthesized the great Kalachakra Tantra into the Lagu Tantra, the abbreviated Tantra. He just condensed it down a lot, right? So he wrote that and condensed it. That one we have. That made its way to India. And then I believe it was the very next king of Shambhala, Pema. So that king, his name is Yashas, Maharishi Yashas. That was earlier incarnation of Panchen Lozang. He wrote the condensed version, the Lagu Tantra of Kalachakra. And I'm almost certain it was the next king, King Pema, or literally White Lotus. He then wrote the great commentary. That's what they always call it, the great commentary, the Vimala-Prabha, enormous Vimala-Prabha. And it was the commentary on the Lagu Tantra of his predecessor. And those two texts, the Lagu Tantra, the short Tantra, and then this extraordinary commentary that totally unpacks it. Well, the commentary was written by an earlier incarnation of the Dalai Lama. So even back then, it wasn't quite guru-disciple, or it might have been for that matter. But it was the king and the next king. The earlier king was the Panchen Lozang, the second king was the Dalai Lama. And those two texts, the Lagu Tantra and then the Vimala-Prabha, those we have in Sanskrit, and of course in Tibet. And then many, many commentaries. Many, many commentaries. So, but then the interesting part, again, by broad consensus, widely accepted, that there will be these 25 kings of Shambhala. This is like a parallel universe, just like Mount Meru and the world that we know. Parallel, it's north of India. And but nobody will ever get it. You'll never get it from a satellite photo. But in that land there will be 25 kings, 25 Kalki kings they're called, of the lineage, 25 Kalki kings, each one a great Dharma king. And when the 25th one comes, that will again be an incarnation of Panchen Lozang. He'll be the final king in that whole sequence. And that's when our world and Shambhala will come together. Be totally manifest. And that is that will start what is called a golden age? Fortunate era. A golden age of tremendous bounty, spiritual and mundane. So there are good times ahead. And the Panchen Lozang Atisha, Panchen Lozang plays a key role all the way through. Very interesting. Hola, so. So I will post that just for your interest. I did a fair amount of research just to make sure I'd get it as authentic as possible. But that whole lineage of the Panchen Lama is coming right up into the present time. Very interesting sequence. So I have a file on that. I've already sent it to Claudio and to Sangye. And I sent two other texts. One was, and then I was just kind of checking that out, and I found on the internet there was just a nice downloadable PDF by a very good scholar named John Newman, and he wrote an introduction to Shambhala, giving its history and so forth, its distinctive characteristics, what's the prophecy and so forth. And they made a free download. It's the first chapter edited by Geshe Zopa on the Wheel of Time, Kalachakra. And the first chapter is free download. So I already have the text, but I downloaded that one chapter. I've zapped that over to Claudio too. Quite interesting. I think there was a third one, but I can't remember what it is. That'll do. That'll keep you busy for a little while. Hola, so. So let's read this story. It's a very nice story. Now, Atisha in Tibet. At that time, so during Atisha's visit to Tibet, he stayed there, I think it was 13 years, and passed away there. At that time, the great translator Rinchen Zambo, really foremost of the translators of the New Translation School, who was an emanation of Manjushri, had studied and trained under more than 20 pandits. So he'd spent a lot of time in India, trained with all these pandits, mastered Sanskrit, and he was like the snowy source of all the streams of Dharma of the New Translation School, Sakya, Kagyu, Gelug. He thought, nowadays there is no one with greater qualities than mine, and I have nothing to ask the Pandit Atisha. He heard that Atisha had come to town. But this man is accomplished. He trained under 20 pandits. I mean, he's a very, great scholar. And so he's hearing, 21, big deal. I've already studied with 20. What do I need 21 for? So he says, no, there's nobody. I don't need to look elsewhere. I don't think it's arrogance. He just kind of, if you know what you're doing, then you know what you're doing. But then, that was his thought. I have nothing to ask Pandit Atisha. However, due to an auspicious sign in a dream, so he had some kind of dream, I shall simply pay my respects. Just do that. In a dream that night, so when he made this resolve, well, I'll just drop in and say hi. But I'm not asking any questions. I have the answers. I know what I'm doing. But then, in a dream that night, a white man appeared and told him, you are being very pompous about your service to sentient beings. There are still many questions for you to ask. Even if you combined all the translators and pundits in one, this single individual would not have all the excellent qualities of this pundit. That is, they are not comparable to Atisha. Tibet has not received all the oral instructions. He then disappeared. So it seems he took his dream quite seriously. Rinzin Zambo then took the long journey to meet Atisha and invited him to his place, where he gave him a seat equal in height to his own. This is a big deal in Tibet. You really, watch when they, the different tulkus and so forth, when they're laying out the seating arrangement. You're talking about one cushion, one little layer higher and so forth. This is part of the culture. So equal. I'm a pandit, you're a pandit, welcome to my home. Eye to eye. Equal in height to his own. In his shrine room on the ground floor were the deities of the common Hinayana, or Shravagayana. There's the ground floor. So he's got his hierarchy well established. In a room on the second floor were those of the Mahayana, Manjushri, Padmasambhava, Tara, Avalokiteshvara, and so on. And on the third floor were images of deities of the Mantrayana, like Vajrayogini and so on. Atisha, then he showed him into his home and he gave him a guided tour. Here's my ground floor, Shravakayana. Second floor, Mahayana. Here's the Vajrayana, third floor. And it showed him all of his shrines. And Atisha composed verses of praise for them all, for all of them. For the first time experiencing faith in Atisha's words, poetry and so on, he was just very, very moved by these verses. I mean, Atisha was just obviously a master. So for the first time experiencing faith, he didn't really have faith in Atisha before, but now he saw his words, poetry and so forth, so on. The translator removed the 3 layers of his own seat so that he had no cushion at all. So he demoted himself. The translator asked him many questions. And hearing many things for the first time, he was struck by Atisha's knowledge, and his pride collapsed. To all the questions Atisha asked of the translator, he replied only that he knew. I know. He didn't elaborate. Atisha was also pleased with the translator, and he commented, with someone like you in Tibet, there's no need for anyone to ask me to come to Tibet. What did they invite me for? You're here. He then asked translator, Lozawa, if you combine all those teachings, Shravakayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana, if you combine all those teachings in one meditation session and practice them, how can you do it? The translator replied, I do not combine the yanas. Rather, I teach each one distinct, and without mixing them, I practice each one by itself. Lord Atisha then remarked, this indicates that you, the translator, are wrong. There is a need for me to be in Tibet after all. That night, the translator meditated during 3 sessions, visualizing the 3 yanas in progressive order in 3 places in his body. Wouldn't be surprised at all if it were Shravakayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana. Crown, speech, and then heart. That's a guess, wild guess. The Pandit knew what he was doing. Atisha, as he's doing this, Pandit was eavesdropping in on his mind. And the Pandit, Atisha, knew what he was doing and told him, translator, that's no good, you won't get anywhere. That could be really quite shake you up a little bit. I thought I was practicing in private. Rinchen Zambo asked him, well then, how do you do it? And then Atisha's response, whatever I say, wherever I am, whomever I accompany, whatever I am doing, I make the ethical discipline of Vinaya my foundation. Since all sentient beings have been my mother, I meditate on them as such. I train in the pure view of seeing them as my mother. As the deities are unborn, I meditate on them as such. Unborn again. When he says, I meditate, that means he's not reifying them. If you do not know how to combine those, you will not obtain the essence. Lord Atisha also said, now you see it's indented here, this means he's now spoken verse. I've said before, can't really convey verse so well in English, but we can get the meaning, and that will have to be good enough. Our teacher, refers to the Buddha, our teacher has well taught that ethical discipline, shila samadhi prajna, shila, that ethical discipline is the basis of all excellent qualities. The spirit of awakening, bodhicitta, which is linked with great compassion, mahakaruna, is praised above all. Enlightenment is certain with the union of the stages of generation and completion, which are not fettered by the signs of good thoughts. Speak of signs here, fettered by signs, you know that means reification. Not fettered, even by tainted virtue of reification of good thoughts. It must be permeated with insight into emptiness. These are the tasks of individuals of small and great capacity, and medium capacity as well. Small capacity, those who are practicing for the sake of achieving fortunate rebirth in the future. Medium capacity, those who are practicing, striving for their own liberation. Great capacity, those who are dedicated to the Bodhisattva path to achieve enlightenment for the sake of all beings. So these are the tasks, what he just described, are the tasks of individual of small and great capacity and medium capacity as well. Emphasize meditation on impermanence, making offerings and requesting that the wheel of Dharma be turned. If you abandon selfishness, you are following the Jinas counsel. Selfish is not a kind of a general, vague term. It means self-centeredness, placing your own well-being above that of others. And therefore it is antithetical to bodhicitta. If you abandon selfishness, you are following the Jinas counsel. Extensive teachings of this are for the learned. So if you're a scholar, if you're a pandit, okay, then get elaborate teachings. But if you're simply a practitioner, just go right to the core. Righteous are those individuals who synthesize the essence and practice it. There's a quiet, kind of very gentle criticism there. And that is people who are highly intelligent, who have a knack for academia. You find them in Tibet, in Europe, in North America, everywhere. Some people are just very good students. They excel, they get good grades, whether as they're getting their geisha training or high school, university, and so on. And so they naturally like to go with their gifts. And in this traditional context of classical India, early Tibet, they might very well become pundits. But the problem with that, and I've seen it so many times, is that as you just relish what you're good at, and what you're good at is studying and memorizing and debating and analyzing and writing and teaching and composing, and that you never actually get around to taking the essence of it and putting it into practice. It's easy to fall into that, very understandably. But righteous are those individuals who synthesize the essence, draw from their learning, whether it's a great learning, medium, or very modest learning, whatever that is, and then synthesize it. They extract from it the pith instructions and practice it. Noble, I say, are those conscientious people who are not dismissive of actions and the consequences. Don't regard with kind of a casual nonchalance teachings on karma, actions and the consequences. Knowing everything but clinging to one thing is a flaw of scholars. So, in pure scholarship, it's very hard to free oneself from grasping, from partiality, and for that matter, sectarianism. Not engaging in practice is a mistake. Not adopting the good and rejecting evil makes for an empty facade of nobility. Live with wisdom, rich ensemble. This is the admonishment of the great compassionate one. That is Avalokiteshvara. Certainty arose in the mind of the translator Rinchen Sambo, and he made a vow to spend the rest of his life in meditative retreat. So it looks like Atisha had quite an impact on him. There he was, renowned scholar of scholars, maybe perhaps the greatest scholar in Tibet at that time. He had one meeting with Atisha, and he just went into retreat. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. As a result of his practice, he moved on to Kasarpana without leaving his body behind. That speaks volumes. Kasarpana is a pure land of Vajrayogini. Without leaving his body behind, rainbow body. So it looks like Atisha served him well. Lord Atisha also gave practical instructions on practicing the 4 classes of Tantra on a single cushion. So how do you take all of those classes and then synthesize them into one integrated practice in one session? And he composed Indian treatises, that would be in Sanskrit, on the 5-fold practice, which we're about to discuss. Accordingly, the glorious Pamodupa, this was a disciple, early disciple, wasn't he of Gampopa? I think he was a Gampopa disciple, but a Kagyü lineage. Very early Kagyü master, great master. The glorious Pamodupa had 5,800 illustrious disciples, all of whom were liberated solely by means of the 5-fold practice. So it's not designed, I think, to arouse our intense interest. What's the 5-fold practice? And the protector Jigten Sumgön, again, one of the early great Kagyü masters, says, Mahamudra is like a lion, but without the 5-fold practice, it is like a blind man. So Gyatso Rinpoche in his oral commentary, in smaller font here, he tells what they are, but it's going to come up in the root text, so I'm going to go right on. It is reported that by training his disciples by way of the 5-fold practice, 180,000 of them attained extrasensory perception and supernormal abilities. Siddhis. The Jigten Sumgön, I presume. When saying something like that, I think my speculation is that for a being of this caliber, Jigten Sumgön, that many of his disciples would be non-human disciples. Tibet wasn't that heavily populated. It's possible he's referring to 180,000 people, but human beings. But my speculation is probably that refers to a lot of other beings. When great beings come, and this goes back to the time of the Buddha, when great beings give teachings, it's not only human beings come, Nagas may come, Devas will come, Bodhisattvas will manifest. You won't even be able to see them. They'll be manifesting there. And so when great beings teach, they will be addressing all the people, all the individuals who are evident to each other, and then addressing all the others behind them, who are there. Because not only human beings who are drawn to Dharma, and especially when a great being, a Mahasattva, a person like His Holiness Dalai Lama, Gyalug Karmapa, and so forth, Dujum Rinpoche, and so on, well, then all kinds of beings come. There are stories, I can't remember the exact details, but I think it was His Holiness Dalai Lama was up in Ladakh. Don't remember the details of the story, I won't try to convey it. But he just passed along, and it was quite clear that just the local spirits of the area were paying homage to him as he just passed by. It's vague, I know. But doesn't matter. I'm not trying to persuade anybody of anything. I'm just kind of reading my teleprompter. That's when it came up. Regarding that practice, okay, he's aroused our curiosity, I think. What's this 5-fold practice? Regarding that practice, it is said, cultivating the spirit of awakening, okay, bodhicitta, and your chosen deity. We'll look up there, just go back and forth. First of all, cultivating bodhicitta. Secondly, meditating on your own body as being that of the deity. So this is self-generation. That's what you're doing, is self-generation, stage of generation. Okay? So the first one is bodhicitta. Second one is some degree of self-generation. But we know in this, it's perfectly clear in this Mahamudra lineage, and it's equally clear in the Dzogchen lineage, that on this path you don't necessarily have to fully achieve the stage of generation. If your Vajrayana practice is comprised only of stage of generation and completion, then Tsongkhapa says, completely finish the stage of generation. And that is, if you've not achieved shamatha prior to your practice of stage of generation, well, for heaven's sakes, achieve it while you're in. And His Holiness comment, I just read this recently, that if you can abide in flawless samadhi for 4 hours in your stage of generation practice, holding the whole mandala, because it's not just a deity, it's the whole mandala, the palace within, it's 3-dimensional, it's quite an elaborate virtual reality. Anybody who's had empowerment, you know what I'm talking about. should be able to hold the whole mandala and the palace and yourself and any other beings there may be in the visualization, in the mandala, and full detail of yourself, the appearance of yourself within the mandala as a deity, with pure vision, sustaining simultaneously the divine pride, suffused with the realization of emptiness of all of that, and sustain that fusion of Shamatha, Vipashyana in stage of generation, and be able to remain there for 4 hours. So then you're ready for stage of completion. Well, all that really said was you've achieved Shamatha in the stage of regeneration. Right? So if that's your path, this is the Gelugpa path, it's the Sakya path, then that's it. So you're going to be spending a good deal of time in stage regeneration. Because if you don't complete it, you can always go into Tumo and the other stage of completion practices, but they just the same old thing I've been saying all along. They will not come to fruition, full fruition. You'll probably get some experiences, some insights, some benefit. They will not come to full fruition if you've not completed the stage of generation. And the Dalai Lama just said how you do that. So you can always venture into more, anybody, and just start doing the practices you can. They will not bear the full fruition. You haven't laid the foundation sufficiently. And people are so impatient, not just Westerners, Tibetans all over the place. They just don't want to linger. So I guess they're just not taking the very notion of path very seriously. Here in this yana, in the Mahamudra and clearly in the Dzogchen, you don't necessarily have to fully develop stage regeneration. You do need to develop the pure vision, the divine pride. You do need to, and it can be simply an Avalokiteshvara. That could be sufficient. He made that perfectly clear in Spacious Path to Freedom. There's no rest to mandala and really complex visualization, right? Sadhana's right there for everybody to read. It's very simple. Pure vision, divine pride, Avalokiteshvara. Do it. And then move on to Shamatha, Vipashyana, and into Mahamudra itself. So we have so far two. Bodhicitta, and then generating yourself as the chosen deity, the personal deity, Yidam. That's the second. Third, meditate on your spiritual mentor, Guru Yoga. That's the third one. Guru Yoga. And this is Vajrayana Guru Yoga. There are multiple levels, often overlooked. There's Shravakayana level Guru Yoga, very meaningful, where you look upon your Guru as an emissary of the Buddha, of the historical Buddha. An emissary, not the same thing at all, not even remotely, but an emissary. An emissary is not a king or a prime minister. But if the ambassador comes to your town, you treat him with all the respect, him or her, with all the respect of the king, the prime minister, the president, whoever is being represented. This is representative of a whole nation. So you show them an enormous amount of respect. Whether they're ugly or fat or have whiskers or bald or whatever, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what their personality is. This person's representing a whole government. You show them great respect. That's Shravakayana. Mahayana, you're viewing your guru as if he or she were a Buddha, as a conduit of the blessings of Dharmakaya, but not as a Buddha. The Dalai Lama made this really clear to me. Mahayana, as if Sangeki Dushe Sha. You place kind of the attitude of viewing as if, so that you can receive, so the guru can be a clear conduit of the direct blessings of Dharmakaya. Pure, right? But when it comes to Vajrayana, then there's no emissary business and there's no as-if business. You look upon your guru and you identify your guru as Buddha, as Samattabhadra, right? And so that's it. So this is the most powerful Guru Yoga, and it's the only one that is suitable for Vajrayana in general and for Mahamudra and Dzogchen. So now we have 4. Bodhicitta. Oh, it's just 3. No, it's just 3. Bodhicitta, generating yourself as the Yidam, your Guru Yoga. 4th is Mahamudra, which was earlier called the view of non-conceptuality, or you can insert Mahamudra Dzogchen, but Dzogchen Mahamudra, you know what that refers to. That's 4, and then finally practice the Dharma of dedication. Dedicate merits. So those are the 4. There are no kinds of practices of the Sutrayana or Mantrayana, according to the New Translation School, that are not included among those 5 topics. He does say New Translation School, so there is something left over. If you're following the Old Translation School of Nyingma, but he's going to go right there immediately. The tradition of these instructions these instructions means this whole text and the preceding one, the Spacious Path to Freedom, are all about the union of Mahamudra and Dzogchen, New Translation School and Old Translation School. So the tradition of these instructions, it's called the Peiyu lineage, within Nyingma, adds onto them the leap over, or the direct crossing over of great perfection. So you have those 5, and then you also have the leap over, thereby completing the practices of the 9 yanas. So then you've fully included the Ati Yoga, or the Mahasandhi, the 9th yana, which is Dzogchen, which is comprised of the the cutting through and the direct crossing over. You should practice them upon a single cushion, or within a single session. So that was really the import of Atisha's counsel to Rinchen Zambo. I shall give a concise account of their meaning as taught in the design of Mahamudra composed by Lord Pamuduba and Jigten Sumgön's 3 dharmas. So he's drawing from 2 of the greatest of the great in the Mahamudra lineage, that then gives you a concise kind of pith instructions, the core of this 5-fold practice, which is the necessary complement to your practice of Mahamudra. So it's so helpful to know what is indispensable. In the path of Dujum Lingpa, we know so clearly preliminary practices. Shamatha, Vipashyana, Tekchut, Turtgyal, we're done. That's absolutely essential. Does this mean don't do anything else? He never ever suggests or implies that. What about if you'd like to augment that with stage regeneration practice? Maybe some Tummo practice. What if you'd like to augment it with maybe some 7-point mind training or what have you? What about your Dharma protector practice? Can you augment it? Of course you can augment it. Of course, not exclusive. But what's indispensable if you're going to proceed on this path? Shamatha, Vipashyana, Tekchut, Turtgyal. Here on this path of Mahamudra, the 5-fold practice. That's indispensable, right? And then Mahamudra. That's indispensable to achieve the first yoga, single-pointed, achieve the Mahayana path of accumulation, and proceed on the path. So, I love its clarity, the openness of it, the depth of it, quite extraordinary. So I think we'll enjoy this conclusion, which will go on a bit, but really summing up everything that he did in the preceding 30 chapters, and then putting it all into one. It's very, very juicy. So I'm very glad. And I feel it's quite sufficient. I don't feel I've left out anything. I don't think I've gypped you. By the time we finish next Monday, we will, one way or another, we will finish this chapter. And then I will leave with no regret. Okay? So enjoy your day.